Sounds good.
Oh.
Well, it's nice to talk to you anyway. So.
Yes, it definitely is. Okay, I should be recording right now. I think we're recording. Well, Amba, it is so nice to meet you after, what did we say, 5 years? How long have we been in touch with each other?
I think it was about, almost 5 years now. I reached out to you maybe 2015 when I first started my project.
Amazing how quickly time flies. And you were at the time, you said, living in Singapore?
I believe I was living in Singapore. Yes, I would have been for sure. And I moved there in 2014. And then, since then I've been in Singapore, LA, and now I'm in New York.
Brooklyn. That's okay to say. Because I've been there many times recently. Our daughter, as I said, was living in Brooklyn. And now she is traveling overseas in some areas I've never heard of before.
Okay, where is she?
For masters. She is in the Caucasus. She was in Uzbekistan and Armenia and Kazakhstan, I think. There were so many countries. I'll be meeting her in a couple of months, but it's a process of travel that she really wanted to go through and get some Russian immersion lessons and see a part of the world she had never seen before. So it's so nice to connect with other people from different parts of the world. And I didn't realize you had traveled so much. But you contacted me several years ago by email because you knew I had written some stories or some books on happiness, and you were, I guess, publishing your book for the first time, and now you are an author of 3 books. Why don't you show us what the 3 books are, just so everybody could get a picture of them?
Sure. So I'll give you a quick overview in terms of when they were created. So this was the first book, infamous book that I sent through to you to review. So that's for people finishing high school. There we go, a little speed read.
I loved all of the illustrations that were in that. It was such a fun book that wasn't just informational, but it really touched the heart and the soul of the reader. And there was a feeling of it being very interactive and got people thinking about different things they might not have thought about and thinking in different ways, which is what I loved. Okay, so book 2.
Thank you for that feedback. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.
My goal was to make it so that, in this social media age, that people can just pick open the book to any page and just grab something and take it, as opposed to finishing school with all these textbooks to get more information. So I wanted to make it as engaging as possible. But all of the series has been designed by a beautiful friend of mine who is Swedish. She's a graphic designer. So she's done an awesome job in doing the series. So this is the second book, which is for kids starting high school. So this came about because I'm the eldest of 6, and my youngest brother, he was making the transition to high school. So I worked with him and his friends to he doesn't read. He'll pick open maybe a surfing magazine, if that. Yes. So he was my lowest level of engagement. I was like, would you read it? So.
And then you knew you had a winner, right?
Like, okay, good. Got you on board. And then the last book, which came out last year, was for kids starting school. So this is really light for parents to read before they make the transition to school. So the goal, as you can probably tell, there's a theme around transitions. And my goal is to support youth through these big changes, because for me it was quite overwhelming. And I believe that there's a need to positively prepare kids and make self-help books fun.
Well, I think this is where I want to go next is your story, your backstory. The theme that I remembered was following your happiness. That was what I got out of your book when I read it, in that rather than just following some outside plan as to what a person should do at each juncture of life, your book was really designed around what is it that makes you feel happy? What are those kinds of things that maybe your heart or your soul wants to explore? Maybe things you didn't even know you could explore. But tell me just a little bit about your background. We already found out you are one of 6 children, but you grew up in Australia?
I did. I grew up in Australia, Sydney, Australia. And
okay.
I guess if hindsight is such a beautiful thing, isn't it? Because when I was a kid, I used to love writing. I used to always journal and write poems. And I think, if I had have perhaps listened to myself or trusted myself from an earlier age, it would have probably been obvious that I should have been a writer. But there's all this stigma around, writing being not a very stable career, and I don't know, there's all these shoulds that go through your mind, I think. So I was super anxious when I finished school. I didn't know what I wanted to do and put all this pressure on myself to pick like one perfect path. So it was my own experience of having no idea what I wanted to do that made me want to create a resource for these transitioning students to prepare them. So I essentially wrote it for a younger me, and I've had some good feedback from students that have made the transition that is still relevant. I graduated in 2004, so what's that?
15 years ago, I think.
15 years ago, yeah. But I think that there is a lot of awareness today around this idea that people don't have to just stick to one career, that we can change careers and we can still find ourselves as we grow older. So I'm not sure if you saw Oprah released a book 2 weeks ago, like Follow Your Path, I believe it is. So with a similar vein. So.
Oh, all right. You've referenced something very interesting. You said, looking back, you could see that you always had this interest in writing. So there it was, that thing that made you feel good. It was just natural, a natural calling for you. And yet you were following another path. I also remember you mentioning to me, maybe in one of your correspondence, that you had grown rather anxious, as if maybe I'm on one path, but I should be on another. So let's talk about what started that first book, because I felt like I was on an interesting journey when I read that book. So tell me a little bit about it from a personal standpoint, and then talk a little bit about what some of the avenues that book brings about for people to consider. Leaving high school, right? And you call them the leavers, right? Leaving high school, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's it. School leavers. So I'm not sure, the book is written to be for anyone, across America, England, Australia. So I'd be interested to hear your feedback, to be honest, around that transition from high school, which is year 12, into the world after school in America. In Australia, it's very common to have a gap year or to go into work before you study. But I understand here a lot of people go straight to college.
It's a very unusual concept. Gap years I only started hearing about maybe 10 years ago. Interesting. And that was the first time I heard about the gap year, because everything here was consecutive and continuous, except for maybe some students years ago when I was in school that maybe graduated high school, wanted to go on to college, but would have to work their way through. But there was really, by and large, no such thing as a gap year. Now I see it between, let's say, college and graduate studies, gap years. But I would say that your country was ahead in the culture.
Yeah, I remember seeing Barack Obama's daughter. She took a gap year. I remember seeing that on the news, and it was a big thing. I was like, what? Why is that so interesting? Like, all of my friends are doing it. But yeah, that kind of was the first time that I noticed that cultural difference in terms of making that transition. But by and large, the book is intended for anyone finishing school that doesn't know if they want to go straight to college, if they'd like to work, if they'd like to take a gap year, or perhaps, in today's society, there's so many entrepreneurs doing their own thing straight out of the school gate. So I feel like with the internet and access to social media, people, we hear these success stories overnight, but I think the world is your oyster, so to speak. And that sounds, I think, amazing, the opportunity. But in the same breath, for me, and I know for a lot of other people, it breeds anxiety, that overwhelming amount of choice. So what I intended to do was my goal is to break these choices down into those 4 categories that I just explained, and then just briefly give an overview of all the pros and cons.
You might as well, because maybe there's someone today who is in high school or even in college thinking, what am I going to do next? Go through those 4 categories, because as I read that book, I actually felt like I was on a journey in each one of those categories, and I enjoyed it as a reader, and I was way beyond the gap year era,
I have had people of all ages, to be honest. Even
it's universal.
Parents at 70 years old, they were like, I want to change my path. So I perhaps the title of Finding Your Path After School is a bit limited to really that path change. But as I mentioned, the first path I explore is travel, and all the benefits that come. You were explaining earlier your daughter's exploring amazing countries, and I'm sure in that she's meeting people and experiencing different cultures and just learning things that you can't learn in the classroom. So I believe, and I've done a lot of travel as we've kind of touched on, but I believe that travel is priceless, and that there's just, I feel it's invaluable. So I always encourage graduates to explore that if it's something that they're considering. It's not right for everybody, but even if it's a holiday, the Hamptons for a week, or I don't know, whatever tickles your fancy, if you don't like the backpacking style. And so travel is something that you can slot in any part of your life, but that's something that I explore as a very important option for finding yourself if you don't know what you want to do. And the second category would be studying. So a lot of people after high school go on to further their studies for their career. Certain careers you have to have a degree in, not all, obviously. So I look at the benefits of studying and different tools that you could use to pick what to study. And then just all the different, as you mentioned, the goal is to make people feel good and get excited about this.
And you did that. And I think some of it has to do with the illustrations. It was the way in which you wrote it, but the illustrations supported a very light and lovely life feeling where you can explore life rather than feeling like you were under what's next. And I think that it gives the reader a very good outlet, almost like they can take a nice breath and think, oh, you know what, maybe I do have other options. So I thought that was very beautiful. If I can add one interesting point of view as an American, let's say from an American perspective, even though I travel a lot, it's not that common for Americans to travel. My family, we travel all the time, and I'll share this with you. No matter where we go, we will always find people from Australia. And I learned, like decades ago, the Aussies love to travel. So do you see in your culture where you could talk about that in your book, that's only becoming something more popular here in America now, and it wouldn't have been popular for young people to the degree that it would have been in Australia, but it's becoming more and more of a popular thing.
Yeah, I can see that, and you're right. Everywhere I go, I was in Norway in this tiny little town and asked someone to take a photo, and they're Australian. I'm like, what
and your accent.
Everywhere.
That's how we got to know a lot of them too. I've been in, it's funny, I was in Thailand years ago. Everywhere we are, we find the Aussies. They're usually loud.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you know that, but they're friendly loud. And so I would say that's a cultural difference, but things have changed dramatically here. And I think that there's so much to be gleaned when you're outside your own bubble and you go and travel. And you're right, you could go backpacking in Appalachia here in America, or you could get on, you could go and take trips around the world. It doesn't matter. But in each case, you're broadening your perspective. You're getting to know new people. And you're also extending yourself outside the comfort zone and maybe learning some new skills or learning about new parts of life that maybe you never considered because you never saw them. So that's a really good thing. Okay, school's number 2. The travel was number 1.
Yes.
And then, what are the 2 other tracks?
The next one is unavoidable at some point, I should say, finding your career. So that's something that some people know what they want to do from when they're young. Some people like me won't listen to it till later. But, so, I do have friends, for example, a friend that's a nurse. She always wanted to be a nurse. So that was never a question for her. But if you're one of those people that has no idea what they want to do, I know various friends that have been in their jobs for 10, 15 years and they now want to switch careers. So
very common now, right? People, they reach a certain plateau and they think, okay, there's no more life for me in this. So what's next? And what's different and what's new, right?
Yeah, so in the career section, I give, because remember we're talking to people that are finishing high school, so they don't have a resume yet or a cover letter. They probably haven't interviewed, or maybe they have in local shops or something. So just basic skills that break down getting into the workforce, different tips that they can use for interviewing and thinking about. I think my favorite quote that's in the book is Steve Jobs' quote, pick a job that you love and you won't have to work a day in your life. That's very powerful. And it's kind of cliche to talk about, find a job you love, but how many hours we spend in our work, it is the most important thing, really, I think. So I feel grateful now that I've found my way back to writing and I finally got there. Yay.
That is wonderful. All right. Did we cover 3 or all 4?
We've covered 3. So the last chapter pretty much encompasses everything that doesn't fall into those 3, and that's creating your own path. So this might be starting a charity, starting your own business that's whatever, I put little tools in to work out what you're interested in so you can come up with your own business on the side and just let your imagination go wild and think about what's outside of that. And that was a fun chapter to write. It's very open-ended, but there is just endless amount of options, so you can't really fit it into one book. But
well, even watching you as you're talking about this, you're so happy, even as you're thinking about your topic, which is wonderful, isn't it? But my sense would be for anyone who is a parent, maybe listening to this, or a young person, and again, it could be easily someone in college, it doesn't matter, someone who's finished college, that idea of finding one's path is really universal. My sense is that, and people meeting you could see this, the book is like a friend that takes you by the hand and says, let's go on an adventure. And whatever the adventure is, it's going to be good, because we're going to find out those things that you like, because life is a journey, and along the journey, you're going to find your path. And I thought that your book and your personality and your desire really coming out of your own life of feeling anxious, of, graduating from university and being in a career that really maybe was not a fit for you, it helps you to connect with a lot of the prospective readers. From the point of view for the other two books, starting high school and then starting school, just tell us a little bit about what that would mean for a parent considering getting those books and why you feel like they're important. I know they are, because I was a homeschooling mom with our daughter, and I could remember from age 2, I would bring out books and we would read them together and we'd point to different things, and that's how we bonded and learned it. You like that? That's some endorsement for me as the teacher. But the thing about it is that when you start getting into books, you start to dream about new things. Your mind expands. So talk a little bit about whether it's the starting school or the starting high school, and some of the different elements that might be in there that would help readers, parents, as well as children.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll start with the starting school one, because I guess that comes first, really. And there are a couple of books out there already that talk about starting school. So I guess how I was trying to fill a gap that I saw in that market, we haven't touched on, but my background is in positive psychology. So my passion is very much making people's lives better. So a lot of the time psychology focuses on when there's something wrong with someone, whereas positive psychology is just focusing on everyone and how we can make life even better. So in this first book, it's in rhyme, and it's a little boy that goes to school, and he does all the things like eating his lunch and so forth that you do at school, which are important to learn. But I wanted to take it that extra step and talk about feelings, that you might be scared and that you can speak to your teacher, and talking about different friends and little tips that they can use to say hi to a friend. Just really basic, but just touching on a bit more of the emotional side of starting school, so that we can prepare students emotionally, practically, and socially all in one for that start to school. And they can have these conversations up front about maybe one day you will feel scared, but then it ends on a high, so it's not trying to scare them as such, but we're just having all of these kind of conversations. So that was a really fun book to write, because it's completely different to different age bracket, obviously, but it was fun. I don't have kids yet, but yeah, I'd be interested to hear about different resources that you used and how your children went with starting school. Were they excited? Oh, you said they were homeschooling.
She was in preschool. I only have the one. She was in preschool, and then because we traveled a lot, there you go, I started with the homeschooling thing. Oh, this is the most antisocial thing I've ever heard of. But my husband said, Maura, just try it for 1 year. Our daughter happened to love it. So there were a lot of typical things in school our daughter didn't deal with, but she did go 1 year on a special program. And I said, Kaylee, you want to go again next year? And she said, no. She said, I get so much more accomplished at home. And she said, as much as I'm with everybody at school, this was very funny, which shows you kind of an entrepreneurial mind. She said, Mom, even though I enjoy being with other kids at school, she said, when we go to lunch, we're not allowed to talk to each other. If we want to go and get water, she said, we have to stand against the wall. We can't talk to anybody. And she said, it makes no sense to me. And I think she was thinking about being part of like inside a Disney rope where, you have to wait online for an hour and a half. And she said, Mom, I get so much more done. I get my afternoons free, my weekends free. So she was a unique child. And then she enrolled herself in college at 13. So she didn't fit into it. But I want to offer this to you. As you're speaking to me about starting school, I had memories coming back.
Sorry, I lost you for a second.
Oh, all right. How about now? Can you hear me again? Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
So
awesome. So that's so interesting to hear about the homeschooling world. I haven't even kind of touched on that here. So
But
I'd
you know,
love
that's
to.
another thing, finding your path. I would have hated to be a homeschool student, but she loved it. And she's got so many friends. So for her, it worked out very well because she was very self-directed. But this is what I want to mention about your early book for starting school. I couldn't wait to go to school because I wanted to make new friends when I was a child. Then I changed schools and it was first grade. We had a boy in our class and he was a big boy who cried every single morning. And it was, oh, he didn't want to leave his mother. And as soon as you opened up that book and started talking about the feelings, I don't know how many other books there are out there, but what a wonderful way of transitioning a child, not just into a place and a space, but also into a new social context, a new emotional place, and talking about it and providing, let's say, the format and the conversational arena. So when they go into that transition, you've already kind of discussed it and prepared them. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, and it's all about that preparation. Like you said, it's, you know, we don't have to hone in on it and make it this, you know, huge thing we talk about every day, but I think it's very important to put aside a time before that transition takes place just to have that discussion. So hopefully this is a tool that can be used around the world for different students.
I would have had it if our daughter was 4 years old heading off to kindergarten. I would have definitely done it. All right, and then how about the one with starting high school? Because you want to talk about transitions. That's another huge transition.
Yes, yeah. So the last one I'll chat about is the starting high school transition. And for me, you know, looking back on my experience, I remember we transitioned to high school at a younger age than you here in America. Oh. So we are actually in year 6 to year 7 in Australia. That's our transition. So I guess it's a little bit different. I've actually now just updated this to be relevant to the American audience because initially it was for 12-year-olds and now it's more for 16-year-olds. 15, 16, are you in America?
Okay. You know, it used to be you'd start high school usually at 14, but then there was junior high school the 2 prior years. So I understand it, but either way, whether it's junior high school or regular high school, major transitions.
Yeah, so hopefully it can apply to, it's quite broad so that it can apply to between 12 to 16-ish. There are tools for emotional tools, increasing happiness. We've got tools on bullying, friendships, crushes, reading your timetable, being independent, all of the puberty, all the things that come part and parcel with also becoming a teenager, because there are so many changes, right, that happen during that period of time.
Loads.
They've got their external changes, they've got their internal physiological changes and different friendship groups. So it's a lot of changes for them to navigate there. And I think that it's an important time for both boys and girls. I think I found when I was growing up, I used to love reading girl kind of self-help, you know, quote books. I guess it's been something that's been going on my whole life. But I didn't want this to be girly or just for girls. I've got 2 younger brothers and I wanted them to be able to enjoy it as well. Like, why just for girls? We know that boys can cry too, and there's
very true.
Yeah, so yeah, that's kind of it in a couple of sentences. But my goal here was to prepare them for the changes that will take place in the high schools. So high schools are generally bigger. The primary schools, you know, they will have multiple teachers, all of those differences that perhaps are told at school before they make the transition, but then also the personal differences that they're going to feel emotionally and socially, and different ways that they can find support. So the bottom line is hopefully that will reduce anxiety during that transition and let them have a little tool that they can turn to if they're feeling vulnerable, or social media. That's a big one too.
You know what's neat? I was wondering where we were going to go to kind of close up this interview. And when you mentioned the word anxiety, first of all, interesting. I didn't know your background was in positive psychology, but it's all over you. It's very evident. And I could see and feel, based on the first book that I read that you had written, that it feels very positive and very supportive. But when you mention that word anxiety today, and I know it's not just here in the U.S., it's elsewhere. It is over the top, and it's also worked its way all the way down to young children. And we were speaking about this just the other day. So that I could see, even as you're speaking about it, that is a really valuable element that you have addressed in the book without saying, don't be nervous, but you're providing some of those talking points and the tools to help people work themselves through what might be an individuated anxiety where they feel like they're totally isolated. It's only me that it's happening to. And you help them feel more like they're not alone. So that's really good. So I'll ask you maybe one other question before we ask where we could find your books. But for you, what has been the most satisfying element of writing not just the first book, but now the series?
That's a really good question. And I would have to say that there's nothing better than people reaching out and saying that the book helped them. I think that while I created them hopefully so that they were beneficial to me and my siblings and that in itself would have been enough. So I got positive feedback from my siblings. And then, that was kind of a project in itself. I was like, okay, good. But then it went out into the world and it's found its place. And I've had people finishing high school, people starting high school that have reached out. A girl that was 13 in Australia wrote me this beautiful review of how it made her feel like you said, less alone. And there's nothing better, to be honest, because anxiety is something that I struggled with growing up. And if I can alleviate that for anyone, that's all I can ask for.
I know, it's a beautiful thing. So it's not just working and producing a book, but it's knowing that the book helps people's lives. And I think you almost came full circle with the whole thing, right? Putting some of your own anxiety, writing a book about it, going back to what you loved, and helping other people in the process, and then extending it all the way down to starting school.
Yeah, thank you for letting me share that story. I appreciate that.
I love this. And for me, I love finding people who are doing what they enjoy. And I also, maybe because I came from a different era and my background was being geared to doing what sounded right in a career, which in my case would have been to become a future attorney. And I was halfway through law school and I was like the Walking Dead at 23 years old. So I understand what all that means. But the fact that you could almost find your own path and in the process write books about finding your path, I think is wonderful. So it's great. And that to me is purposeful because we have moved really from a society where people would be plugged into a job or a box for a long time. And it would sort of be a box that at times would be very disconnected from the individual. And today, more and more, I find that people need to feel purposeful. Yes. And so your book helps others toward that end. But where can everybody find your books and reach you and learn more about you?
So I'm online at findingyourpathbooks.com. That's my website. And then from there, you can reach my different social media channels or your channel of choice, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of the above. So yeah, findingyourpathbooks.com. That's me online with my blog and different resources, free resources that you can download if you've got a transitioning student or you're transitioning yourself. There's different resources that you can get there. So
very good. And I should close by asking if you could give one word of advice or one piece of advice to your readers. Let's assume the readers would be not a kindergartner, but what would be your piece of advice if people had you at the big microphone and they want to say, Amba Brown, what do you think? What is your best advice that you could give to me? What would it be?
I like what you'd said. You touched on that, sorry, I shouldn't say that I like what you said, but what you mentioned that anxiety is starting a lot younger now. And I think that sometimes we underestimate the ability at a young age to learn these different skills of who we are and emotional support and just learning, emotional skills at such a young age. And I think that if we could facilitate that more, perhaps we can start finding our path from a younger age. And that's easy. I mean, that's not very helpful for someone that's graduating now, but for parents, I think it's a really important reminder to not underestimate the emotional ability of kids and how we can prevent anxiety moving forward. But for someone that perhaps has already found their path through these transitions and is now out in the world and still finding their path, I would say just keep moving forward and keep momentum. The biggest thing for me was I got frozen with this indecision that I didn't know what to do. And I think that that's why I like the idea of these different pathways. Just jump into one and try it out. And, if it doesn't work, you can move on to another one. You're not going to be stuck. So I think I really like the idea of momentum and just trying new things.
Very good, very good. And you know something, I agree with you. And I think sometimes some of us may need another person alongside of us, even if it's a stranger, an author, to say, it's okay. You could make this transition and you're going to do well with it. So that's very good. Well, Amba, thank you. So nice to meet you. And thank you for sitting in on this interview.
Thank you so much for the time. And
Don't go away, though. Don't go away.
Won't go away.